Hello and welcome. The prisoners of Guantanamo Bay won a major victory in challenging their detention when America's highest court ruled in their favor. The Supreme Court decided the inmates of the controversial prison facility can pursue their cases in U.S. civil courts. After 9/11, American forces captured hundreds of people in the so-called War on Terror and sent most of them to the remote location, prompting questions about the validity of their detention and the way they've been treated. There's also been uncertainty about the future of these so-called enemy combatants. More than 500 prisoners have been released from Guantanamo without charge, and dozens more have been cleared for release, but no country will accept them. There are also those who are scheduled to face a military tribunal with a military-appointed attorney and limited access to the evidence against them. Well, due to the Supreme Court ruling, they may now be able to seek a trial in civilian courts in the United States. Today and tomorrow we explore the Guantanamo debate from a legal and human perspective. Today we ask, how should the US deal with the detainees in Guantanamo Bay? Don't forget, we take your calls on the show, and you can reach us at the numbers at the bottom of your screen. Well, joining me to discuss the latest legal developments, I have law professor Kindra Rotunda, who is a prosecutor with the Military Commission's prosecution team in Guantanamo. She's a reservist holding the rank of Major in the U.S. Army Judge Advocate General's Corps, known as JAG, and the author of the newly released book Honor Bound: Inside the Guantanamo Trials. In it, she discusses her work in preparing war crimes charges against alleged Al-Qaeda and Taliban members for trial at Guantanamo Bay. And from New York, we have Emmy McLean, an attorney with the Center for Constitutional Rights. She works on issues related to Guantanamo and other forms of executive detention, including secret prisons and rendition cases. Welcome both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Major, if I could start with you and ask, I guess you're pretty horrified with the Supreme Court ruling, the decision, and I wonder what impact you see that having on the Guantanamo detainees who can bring their civil cases to the U.S. courts now.
Sure. Well, I disagree with the ruling. A 5-4 majority of the Supreme Court decided for the first time ever in history, and without any case precedent, that detainees captured abroad in an ongoing war now have access to U.S. courts and now have constitutional rights. And I disagree with the decision. Under the law of war, they ordinarily wouldn't have this right. And as Justice Roberts points out in his decision, the procedures that we have in Guantanamo Bay right now before this decision are very robust. In fact, in many regards, they exceed what the Geneva Conventions require. And so I disagree with the opinion.
No, but you say that Guantanamo's, the decision on Guantanamo was unprecedented, but isn't Guantanamo itself a fairly unprecedented environment anyway? Isn't it something fairly new and perhaps, can set its own precedent?
Well, not really. I mean, a lot of people characterize this as a brand new thing and a brand new kind of war. The truth is, every time we get into war, there are new realities and there are new challenges. And Guantanamo Bay is simply a prison camp. Under the Geneva Conventions, you hold the enemy until the end of the war, and that's what we're doing in Guantanamo Bay. And the law requires that, actually provides for that. So this is really an about-face that the Supreme Court has done.
Now, the end of the war is something we could debate in a second, but I do want to get on to Emmy McLean, who's joining us from New York, and ask, in reality, how much of a victory is this Supreme Court decision for the detainees of Guantanamo Bay?
It's quite a significant victory for the men who are still imprisoned at Guantanamo. Of course, we're going to have to see how the hearings play out, but I also want to contest what Major Rotunda just said. It's not unprecedented. This is actually the third time that the Supreme Court has said that the men at Guantanamo have a right to bring these very basic habeas hearings in federal court in the United States. The problem has been that each preceding time when the Supreme Court has held that these men have a right to challenge the factual and legal basis for their detention in federal courts in the United States through the most basic mechanism that exists within the Constitution, Congress has changed the law to strip them of that right. And this time, the Supreme Court said it's actually a constitutional right that cannot be stripped by Congress.
Now, Ms. McLean, if I could ask you, who do you expect to bring the cases to the civil courts in the U.S.? What sort of people? I mean, is it something everyone could take up in Guantanamo?
There have been almost 800 men who have been imprisoned at Guantanamo since the prison camp opened in 2002, intending to be a place outside of the reach of the rule of law. And there's about 275 men who remain. About 200 of them already have habeas petitions that were filed years ago and that were just sitting, waiting, dormant by order of the court as these cases moved back and forth up and down the federal courts in the United States. And now those cases are going to be revisited in the federal courts.
I want to pull an email to Major Rotunda here. It came in from Vancouver in Canada. Carlos Adeloni says, anyone who truly supports democracy, the rule of law, human rights would not accept others having fewer rights than they do. And I wonder, I mean, a lot of our viewers feel like this. Isn't it a valid point bringing up the issue of the value system in America, that rights should be across the board? The rules should be the same.
You know, there are laws that govern this kind of thing, the law of war. And what the law of war says is that you hold enemy combatants until the end of hostilities. And in Guantanamo Bay, in many ways, we're exceeding the Geneva Conventions. There's a lot of criticisms waged about what life is like in Guantanamo Bay. The truth is, it's like a regular camp. It's like a regular detention camp. Detainees get up to 12 hours outside a day. They get access to exercise rooms, videos, gardens, libraries, they can take classes in English, they can take classes in their native language. There's all kinds of things happening. And so I don't think there's really anything wrong with what we're doing in Guantanamo Bay. Yes, we should treat people humanely, and that's what we're doing.
We've got a call on the line from Afghanistan. Good to hear from there. And Ahmed's on the line with a question. Go ahead, Ahmed.
Sorry, thank you first of all for having Al Jazeera English for us. My question is from the lady in D.C. about Afghans that they spent 6 or 7 years in Guantanamo jail, and after being released from there, because the American government do not pay them ransom, that they are innocent, that's why they get released. So they are trialing them again in Afghanistan, and they sentence them for 20, 30 years jail again. Being proved by American that they are innocent, again came and be in the trial for 20 minutes.
Ahmed, let me put that to the Major. Ahmed, that's an interesting point he makes, that, you know, what's happening is, and this is one of the key things, I think, aren't there rules and conventions that say a person can't be sent back to be tortured or detained or trialed elsewhere, especially if they've been cleared in the case of Guantanamo?
That's right, and in fact there's a lot of detainees who we've had a very difficult time finding a country who will take them. The United States will not transfer a detainee to a country where we expect they'll be tortured or mistreated. And so it's a difficult exchange that we go about. There's a lot of negotiating involved. And no, we don't want to transfer a detainee to a place where he will be tortured or mistreated, certainly. Could I respond to one other point that the caller raised, if I could? The detainees who have been released from Guantanamo Bay, those 400 plus, are not being released because they are necessarily innocent. In fact, what we have found is that 5 to 10% of these detainees who are released go back to the battlefield. We know that because they're either later captured or killed. In fact, most recently there was a suicide bomber who went back to the battlefield and became a suicide bomber. Couldn't it be argued,
there are those who would say that if they're in jail and they've been misplaced in jail and wrongly accused, that they actually could then be motivated to go back and actually become active participants?
Except that the evidence
Can I respond as well to a couple of points when there's a moment?
Just about to get to you.
If I could answer your question. It's a possibility, but the evidence doesn't support that, and let me tell you why. One example is we recently, a couple of years ago, released one detainee because he told us for 2 years that he was innocent. We had scooped him up. We shouldn't have him. The United States believed him. They believed what he said. We sent him back to the battlefield, and he admitted on TV that he'd always been Al-Qaeda, that he had fooled the Americans, and that he was going back to battle. So that's not, it seems that they're that way anyway. They're committed to Al-Qaeda. We're not turning them that way.
Amy McLean, thanhanks for your patience. You wanted to respond to these. Please go ahead.
There's a few points that I want to respond to, so I'll respond quickly. I really would like to strongly contest the argument that Guantanamo is a humane prison. These men have been detained for over 6 years, and as the court said in its decision, that is essentially as long as any war in U.S. history, and they have been detained for that entire time. Right now, there's over 70% of the men who are there are in solitary confinement by themselves day after day with no sense of when their confinement will end. And that is in addition to the serious abuses that people have been subjected to. And I also want to respond to the propaganda that's been asserted by the U.S. government about the fact that 30 men have been returned to the battlefield, which was also cited in one of the dissenting opinions in the Supreme Court. The U.S. government has never produced a list of those people. They have speak a number of 30, and when you ask for names of people. The most that they've been able to put on a list is 10 or 12. And you look at the list, and included on that list are people who are refugees, who are living in a refugee camp in Albania. That was run by UNHCR, and what was returned to the battlefield for these men was that they spoke to a journalist when President Bush was in Albania. Included in that group are 3 men who were returned to the UK, who were living peaceful lives in the UK, who had made a movie called The Road to Guantanamo about the brutality of the experiences that they suffered in Guantanamo. So we just need to be really skeptical of some of the assertions and propaganda that is spouted by the US government. This is not a model prison. This is unprecedented, and the people who are there are suffering.
Major, I'm going to ask you, just hold on one second, because I want to get Daniel's been holding on the line from Ethiopia, and I know he's been very patient with this. Daniel, what's your question?
My question is for the woman from Washington. She made a statement by saying, you know, all the detainees in Guantanamo Bay, you're providing them with all kinds of facilities like classes and libraries and everything. How can that be justified, you know, by detaining someone without charges for so long and providing them classes in English and libraries?
Daniel, I'm going to get Major Rotunda.
You can put that in a Major, yeah.
Daniel, I'm going to get Major Rotunda to reply in just a moment. We have to take a short break, and then we'll get to the Major's response. We're going to be back with more on this discussion in just a moment.